Hey, just before we begin, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please subscribe, and consider following me on Twitch for horror gaming streams and on Instagram for other general life stuff. Enjoy the video. After a debatably rocky start in finding its voice, over the last 5 years, the found footage anthology franchise VHS has essentially become the annual cinematic entree for Halloween, with stylishly inventive bite-sized shorts to set the tone for the season. I've only covered 2 entries thus far, as it's not exactly an annual tradition for me personally. However, after last year's thematic focus on sci-fi, 2025's entry is fittingly focused entirely on the subject of Halloween, which in many respects means it has pretty big horror shoes to fill, so I felt especially compelled to visit this one. Now, for my tastes, I've always found VHS to be a mixed bag overall. I still think VHS 94 is head and shoulders above the rest in terms of consistency, but the USP for the series has always been to go in with an open mind and simply embrace the experimentation on display. Inevitably, everyone will have their own unique opinions, so make sure to leave yours in the comments below, but for me out the gate, Halloween is neither the best nor the worst, perhaps landing somewhere in the upper middle. However, this one is easily the most transgressive entry in a very long time, if not ever, because let's just say it has zero fucks to give when it comes to unapologetically killing kids in some utterly depraved and grotesque ways, to the point I'm honestly a little surprised it got away with going as hard as it does. The best way to set your expectations going into VHS Halloween is that, while it doesn't waste any time getting to its sinister obscenities, think of the journey as starting with familiar, trendy pop sensibilities before it pulls the rug from under you in its final 2 segments to deliver pure fucking metal by the end. If that stylistic whiplash sounds enticing, brace yourself as I give you my thoughts on this 2-hour celebration of Halloween in today's modern age. Now, before we dive further into the madness, this video is sponsored by Vezi. Before I got my dog Cheddar, I used to have lazy Sundays, but now I have spontaneous Sundays, where I put on my Vezi socks, Vezi Stormburst, Vezi coat, Vezi belt bag filled with Cheddar's treats and walking accessories, and we just explore where our heart takes us. However, sensible footpaths are not in Cheddar's MO, so I'm always expecting chaos, whether it be windy rivers, steep slippery hills, or simply whatever the actual weather may throw at me. That's why Vezi Stormburst are perfect for such spontaneity, because they're made of 100% waterproof technology, versatile grip and durability, and provide all-day comfort thanks to their cushioned midsole and lightweight breathable material. Vezi Stormburst and their diverse range of other footwear are designed for fearless movement in all urban and natural settings, so when I'm on hikes with Cheddar, my safety and comfort are always assured, so I can disconnect from the stress of the daily grind, embrace my inner adventurous child, and live life to the fullest. In fact, you want to know how perfectly Stormburst lives up to their name? I literally took a Cheddar out during a storm, so why not step into your next great escape with Stormburst, ready for any terrain, rain or shine, and backed by a 1-year warranty and risk-free with 30-day returns. Shop now at vezi.com/ryanhollinger or scan the QR code on screen and get 15% off your first pair at checkout. As I said in the intro, perhaps the most immediate element that stood out to me about VHS Halloween was how firmly planted it was in modern sensibilities. That's not to say every sequence takes place in present day, but rather each of the 6 stories taps into a very distinct pop culture horror trend that's emerged over the last few years. To give you an overview of the general vibe I got from each film, our framing sequence, Diet Phantasma, loosely echoes the visual style of Kane Parsons' Backrooms and other analog horrors surrounding it. Coochie Coochie Coo evokes, as controversial as it's going to sound, TikTok-style uncanny horror like the genius simplicity of Spencer Lackey, and that surreal AI fusion stuff that I constantly keep getting recommended on Instagram. In fact, I wonder if this sequence might controversially use AI. As above, so below is your obligatory classical "don't fuck with the devil, dumbass." You'd think you'd know this this by now, Fun Size is straight up obnoxious mascot horror with a tinge of nostalgia, Kidprint is both barrels gritty true crime, and lastly, House Haunt is mic drop welcome to Halloween bitches. These styles are not mutually exclusive, of course, they all manifest throughout in different ways, but ultimately it does tie back into what's trendy in mainstream culture that I'm personally hit and miss with, but again, it's completely open to your own tastes. Anyway, our framing story, Diet Phantasma, is not the strongest narratively, but I appreciate what it taps into thematically to make it the central interlude between each tale. The entire sequence can be summarized as a group of scientists and the COO of what appears to be a pseudo soft drink manufacturing company called Octagon trial testing a new soda infused with literal phantoms. The way I interpret it is that it's a lampoon on soulless corporate greed at the expense of everyone else's safety and well-being, as it shows the COO's apathetic, morally compromised indifference to the innocent test subjects dressed in orange overalls as if they're prison inmates sent to the slaughter.
Fuck you, Larry!
Each time a new test subject consumes the drink, or at least attempts to consume the drink, it kills them in increasingly absurd and gruesome ways, and the COO's reaction is nothing but pure frustration as he only cares about meeting the deadline to get the drink on the market. Now, call me overthinking it, but to make it funnier in my head, I saw it as a bit of a play on those aggressively marketed influencer type products like Prime or Mr. Beast candy, where it isn't until late into the film does a child become successfully possessed by the product, much to the COO's relief. It's here where he asks the child her favorite drink, and her response is Diet Phantasma, as though now consumed by the viral addiction, so to speak, whilst those who came before it are just naysayers who couldn't handle the intensity of it. The thing is, to reinforce my admittedly very wild theory, it's actually not the only time the film will reference capitalist cynicism, because in directly nodding to Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, the film evokes an overarching commentary on the commercialization of Halloween, and how its overshadowing culture and tradition, that itself becomes personified in each of the sequences in an attempt to fight back with a vengeance in its own twisted way. Now, our first main sequence, Coochie Coochie Coo, is the weakest one in my opinion, because despite a fairly strong thematic setup and interesting antagonist, the storytelling is very guided and spoon-fed and leaves little room for ambiguity. We follow two best friends called Kaylee and Lacey who decide to embrace one last Halloween together before separately going off to college and starting adulthood. From this setup, it conveys a subtly somber undercurrent where both girls ruminate on the symbolic end of their childhood and attempt to retain it for one final night, even dressing as literal babies to foreshadow the overt cautionary tale it seems to imply. However, before embarking on their escapades, they're warned by random kids that they're too old to be trick-or-treating and that Mummy will get them, eerily indicated by the monstrous handprint appearing on their car window. The concept takes on the form of your classical Halloween parable. Eventually, the girls discover a house that appears as if seemingly out of nowhere, which of course ends up being the home of the elusive Mummy, who, as you might expect, literally hoards babies, ironically fitting to the girls' costumes. Kaylee and Lacey end up in a sort of grave encounters type situation where the entrance soon disappears and the house becomes a shadow realm with no escape as they begin seeing ghostly adult babies lurking in the shadows. What follows is the most harrowing depiction of milk I've ever seen in literally anything, when they find another victim being force-fed milk from the 6 tits of the mummy monster, which is a sentence I never comprehended saying aloud. However, the problem is that the storytelling holds your hand the whole way through, as the characters just walk through the house and basically explain everything unambiguously, instead of letting you theorize and figure things out for yourself. It culminates in the girls discovering that, in a previous life, the mummy hung herself while pregnant and tragically now lives in what is essentially a torturous purgatory where she lures in adults and turns them into babies. Naturally, the story ends ends with both girls suffering the same fate. As the twisted, goosebumps-like moral irony suggests, if you don't learn to leave your childhood behind, then you'll be destined to live in it forever, in the grimy, gross depths of darkness and despair. Oh, by the way, obviously by this point you know not to take my thoughts, like, super seriously, but as I said in the opening about this theme of Halloween striking back with a vengeance, there are a few loose, twisted morals on display in some of the preceding shorts, so it's not entirely ridiculous. Now, I have to admit I had a real inherent bias going into the next sequence, As Above So Below, titled in Latin, because it's directed by the creator of Wreck, the scariest found footage film ever made. In fact, one of the costumes in here is actually a reference to it. The way I see it, As Above So Below trusts the patience of the audience. It's much more deliberately paced and unafraid to linger in silence as it slowly escalates towards the climax, if indeed said climax fell pretty flat for me. The story is framed from two perspectives. One sees the investigators of a violent crime scene in which a group of people had their eyes gouged out and bones broken, bar one sole survivor, trying to reconstruct the events of what happened, and another sees phone footage prior to the killings on that fateful night. Unable to recall precisely what happened, the sole survivor Enric reluctantly agrees to lead investigators step by step through the crime scene, located at the abandoned manor of a spiritual medium called Roberta Marconi, who is said to have performed secret occult seances for the Spanish elite. The supporting phone footage sees one of the victims, Vicky, explain that because it's Halloween, tradition states that the realm between the living and the dead has become open, and so the group has the perfect opportunity to contact the dead for themselves. Eventually, the switching perspectives heighten the suspense until we meet in the middle, where the group discover a disconnected, cursed rotary phone that suddenly rings, prompting Enric to answer before convulsing and becoming possessed into killing the entire group. Inevitably, history is doomed to repeat itself when the investigators bring out the phone, ironically making for the perfect reconstruction, as Eric regurgitates the eyes of his previous victims, levitates the investigators, and proceeds to gouge out their eyes in real time before they all fall to their deaths, shattering their bones. While admittedly an underwhelming outcome, it still evokes a strong sense of dread throughout, and I'm just throwing it out here, but I have this curious theory in my head as to whether or not it has the same phantoms as the ones used in Diet Phantasma, given the similar looking manipulation that Enric experiences during his possession. If so, there is a thin thread of narrative association throughout, which we will see in our next one, which does have some conceptual tiebacks to Coochie Coochie Coo. Following this, we have the wildcard of the bunch, Fun Size, which has a lot going for it in concept, but it didn't really work for me because I'm just not into mascot horror, even if I appreciate the appeal. Outside a quick glance at the Wikipedia page, I know nothing about the creator Casper Kelly, but I can see why they might grab some people's attention, having wrote 2 episodes of Cat Dog, directed 2 Scooby-Doo specials, and made a lot of horror comedy shorts for Adult Swim, but none of which I've ever actually seen. In Fun Size, we see a group of adults once again being told that they're too old to be trick-or-treating, as they encounter a mysterious bowl of candy with obscure branding, with one chocolate seemingly resembling a penis. After ignoring the rule of only taking 1 candy per person, they're literally dragged into the bowl of candy, and awaken in a nightmare factory where they find themselves harassed by whatever the fuck this thing is. The twist here is that they're essentially being punished for their greed, echoing the irony of one of the group constantly being cynical towards corporate greed themselves, only for them to be strapped to a conveyor belt and dismembered by a machine, and turned into the very candy found in the bowl. Shortly after, another character gets a tube of confetti shoved up her ass and her head explodes, which is somehow still the second most absurd sentence I've said in this review. You can probably tell in the tone of my voice, but I find the whole thing to be as increasingly tedious as I did with Coochie Coo, in that it's just one boo scare after another, until our 2 camera operators end up escaping through a vent that's revealed to be just another conveyor belt. If I am to say one genuinely positive thing, I do like the darkly cringe cringeworthy detail of the camera operators being engaged, but the girl having severe doubts, because once they realize they're going to die, she is awkwardly forced into accepting her fiance's hand in marriage because he thinks it'll be sentimental and tragically romantic. He then dies severely and she escapes, only to die immediately because mascot horror jump scare. Obviously, I'm harsher on this one because I just don't think it honestly pushes hard enough with the absurdities of mascot horror. There's only 2 somewhat noteworthy deaths, and overall it just feels too safe and uninspired for such a wild concept. However, the next one, oh boy, brace yourself. Our penultimate story, Kidprint, got under my skin in a profoundly ghoulish way to the point I genuinely had to look away. If you do not want to hear about kids being slaughtered, you're best to check out at this point because Kidprint and by extension House Haunt are very much a reverse palate cleanser contrasted against everything we've seen up to this point. What came before was child's play by comparison, as Kidprint is framed as a cold confrontational reality check where on Halloween night 1992, we see the owner of an electronics store called Tim Kelpin documenting and interviewing various teenagers and children so that the tapes can be duplicated and used in the event of their disappearance or death. Now, as dumb as I'll inevitably sound, I'll admit I initially thought the idea here was that parents could literally print copies of their own children like Kodak Polaroid photographs, but in actuality, it establishes a very real, tense and oppressive atmosphere that evokes the stranger danger parental paranoia that hysterically manifests when a child goes missing. Out of all the segments in this entry, I actually think this utterly bleak and upsetting concept has the most potential for feature film expansion, given how many nuances and details are littered throughout that build a remarkably vivid picture of the setting and its characters. From the get-go, it immediately conveys a brooding sense of fear and anxiety, as the children have essentially lost their innocence after intense restrictions and curfews are placed over town due to countless ongoing child murders that have left police completely baffled, perpetrated by whom the media call the Butcher of Ardmore. It very aggressively leans into the video nasty era and the unspoken taboo of killing kids in horror, as we hear in the background about mutilated and decaying bodies being found around town, with more kids going missing by the day. Even before we see anything remotely graphic, it already feels overwhelming to see the palpable tension through the lens of Tim's camera, as he attempts to downplay the situation to his family, as if deluding himself into staying calm when really he fears his own kids might be next. There's definitely something to be said thematically about the invasive nature of recording our privacy, but from Tim's perspective, he constantly films everything in the hopes that what he captures may one day do good for the community, and it creates a genuine likability around him. He's trying to stay strong, compassionate, and supportive to all the worried kids and parents around him. However, Tim is at odds with the profound sense of hopelessness that towers over the town. Eventually, the police ask him for a print of a newly missing girl called Olivia Hamill so they can get it straight to the news, just as we seemingly discover that Tim is actually recording over footage of what appears to be Olivia's own murder. Or at least so it may seem. I believe the intent is to sow the seeds of suspicion that Tim is most likely the killer, only to subvert your preconceived bias when Tim discovers various tapes documenting the horrific torture of a teenager called Drew. After witnessing footage of the teenager being literally skinned alive, Tim ventures further into his store to discover that one of his employees, a technician established earlier called Bruce, is in fact the Butcher, who is currently in the process of tormenting Olivia while wearing the skin face of Drew. Like, don't say I didn't warn you that this was fucked up. It is very Poughkeepsie Tapes inspired. The outcome is cruel and nihilistic. Sometimes evil simply wins, as Bruce incapacitates Tim and frames him for the murders, leaving a deeply disturbed Drew and Olivia to violently kill Tim in mistaken retribution. However, whatever catharsis it may have gave Drew and Olivia is short-lived when they're soon killed off-screen, with news reports seeing the town turn on Tim's family, his reputation tarnished with "yeah, I'm not surprised" bias, while Bruce plays dumb and innocent, I think even implying abuse in his own childhood, and vows to continue the Kidprint service for the sake of the children. Yeah, seriously, the more I think about this segment, the more I come to the conclusion that it's an all-timer for VHS, but it is definitely going to get this video demonetized. Was it worth it? We'll find out. Our final sequence, House Haunt, is thankfully more lighthearted but still brutal in its own way, as it sees a playful father called Keith preparing his next Halloween haunted house attraction that he's made an annual tradition with his whole family. Like Kidprint, the storytelling here is very solid overall, with the characterization being surprisingly nuanced. We see a montage of Keith and his son Zach throughout the years, bonding over the tradition, only for present-day Zach to grow resentful that what initially appeared to be a loving relationship with his father was actually a one-sided transaction to fulfill Keith's own obsessive hobby. Zach comes to believe that he was only ever a prop to Keith's attractions, and reluctantly agrees to go to the store with Keith to get further props one last time, with Keith finding an innocuous vinyl called Halloween Horrors that he thinks will set the right mood for the night. The general concept is to basically pay tribute to practical visual effects and makeup artist Rick Baker, who appears in the segment a decade after his own retirement to play a grouchy neighbor who constantly belittles and criticizes Keith for his awful effects that appear fake and unconvincing, lampooning his own iconic status within the horror industry. You could see it as a consolidation of everything we've seen up to this point, as the sequence takes us through each of the various rooms where the vinyl record causes each attraction to come to life, and what ensues is blood, guts, gore, with children being torn apart and melted on screen, as we go from a cemetery to a crypt to a torture chamber to a witch's coven, until the literal house itself comes to life. In the purest sense, it is gleeful, celebratory absurdity that rides us into the credits, with a happy Halloween send-off fitting to the bombastic style of VHS. And with that, I guess I should say happy Halloween wherever you may be. Yes, we still have a few weeks to go until the actual day, but until next time, if you enjoyed this video and you're not yet subscribed, please do subscribe for more videos like this. It really, really helps me out. As well as that, leave a comment. I really want to know your thoughts. That always excites me. I am a nerd who reads all of them, so you should definitely consider doing that. And yeah, until next time, stay safe, stay away from haunted candy and soft drinks, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.